Grace's heel snapped the moment she stepped onto the marble aisle, her body pitching forward as gasps rippled through the ballroom. She caught herself just before falling, her fingers brushing the cold floor, her heart slamming against her ribs. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, and before she could straighten fully, Min Jae's daughter, leaned in behind her, her breath cold against Grace's ear. "He'll divorce you within a year," she whispered, "just like the previous two." Grace froze. The orchestra kept playing, but the sound felt distant, muffled, like she had been dropped underwater. She forced a smile, lifted her chin, and walked toward the man waiting at the altar. But her hands trembled, her pulse raced, and the whisper replayed in her mind like a curse. If you're watching this and you already feel that sting, don't forget to like this video so more people can find stories like this, and subscribe, because this one only gets deeper. Min Jae's eyes softened when he saw her approach, but even his warmth couldn't drown out the judgment pressing in from every corner of the room. The Korean elites stared at her like she was an intruder, a foreigner, a mistake, a temporary ornament. Grace swallowed hard. She could feel their eyes crawling over her skin, dissecting her youth, her dark complexion, her accent, her very presence. She reached him. He took her hand gently, squeezing it as if to steady her. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Your daughter has sharp words," she whispered back without looking at him. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Not here. Not now. The ceremony blurred. Vows exchanged. Rings slipped on. Applause that sounded more like polite obligation than celebration. And then the photos, endless flashes, stiff poses, smiles that felt glued on. Grace's cheeks ached from pretending. Every time she blinked, she saw Sumin's face. The smirk, the certainty, the cruelty. When the photographer finally lowered his camera, Grace exhaled shakily and stepped aside, needing a moment to breathe. She barely made it 3 steps before a cluster of women intercepted her, Min Jae's relatives. "You're very young," one said in Korean, her tone dripping with condescension. "Very bold." Another leaned closer. "Do you even understand what it means to be a wife in this family?" Grace didn't answer. She didn't trust her voice. She simply bowed politely and walked away. But their laughter followed her like smoke. She slipped out onto the balcony, gripping the railing as the cold soul air hit her face. She blinked back tears. "1 year," she whispered to herself. "She thinks I won't last 1 year." A voice behind her said, "She's wrong." Grace turned. Min Jae stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He stepped closer, his hands sliding into his pockets. "She's hurting," he said quietly. "That doesn't excuse her," Grace replied. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." Silence stretched between them, heavy, fragile. "Do you regret this?" she asked suddenly. His eyes widened slightly. "Grace, just answer me." He exhaled. "I don't regret you." But something in his tone, soft, hesitant, made her chest tighten. She looked away. "Everyone thinks I'm temporary." "I don't," he said. But she wasn't sure she believed him. Not yet. Not after the whisper. Not after the stares. Not after the way his voice trembled when he said it. Later, during the reception, Grace moved through the room like a ghost, smiling, greeting, bowing, but inside, she was unraveling. She caught snippets of conversations. "She's too young. He's repeating his mistakes. Foreigners don't last in families like this. She won't survive his temper. He'll get bored." Each word sliced deeper. She found herself drifting toward the far corner of the ballroom, where the noise softened and the lights dimmed. She needed air again. She needed space. She needed Grace. She turned. Sumin stood there, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You're hiding," the girl said. "I'm breathing," Grace replied. "Same thing," Sumin muttered. Grace studied her. The girl was beautiful, sharp jawline, flawless skin, the kind of elegance that came from old money and strict upbringing. But her eyes were wounded. "Why do you hate me?" Grace asked softly. Sumin scoffed. "I don't hate you." "Then what is this?" "This," Sumin said, stepping closer, "is me protecting my father." From what? From you. Grace's breath caught. You don't know me. I know enough. Sumin snapped. You're young. You're foreign. You don't understand him. You don't understand this world. And you won't last. None of them do. Grace swallowed hard. I'm not them. Exactly, Sumin said. You're worse. She turned and walked away before Grace could respond. Grace stood there, stunned, her throat burning. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to run. But she stayed. Because she loved him. Because she believed in what they had built before this day. Because she refused to be the fragile ornament they expected her to be. A waiter passed by with champagne. Grace grabbed a glass and downed it in one swallow. Her hand still shook. Her heart still raced. But she straightened her shoulders and walked back into the crowd. She would not break. Not tonight. Not in front of them. Not because of a whisper. If you're still watching, drop a heart emoji in the comments so I know you're here with Grace. The night dragged on. Speeches. Toasts. Forced laughter. Grace barely heard any of it. Her mind kept replaying Sumin's words. 1 year. 1 year. 1 year. When the final guests left and the ballroom emptied, Grace finally let her shoulders sag. She felt drained. Hollow. Min Jae approached her slowly. You held yourself well, he said. I survived, she replied. That's not the same thing. He hesitated. Graced about what she said. Don't, she whispered. Not tonight. He nodded. They walked out together, but the distance between them felt wider than the entire ballroom, and Grace couldn't shake the feeling that the whisper wasn't just a warning. It was a prophecy, and she didn't know yet if she had the strength to break it, but she would try, even if it broke her first. Mini cliffhanger. The next morning, she would discover something that made the whisper feel even more dangerous. Something hidden. Something from his past. Something that would change everything. Grace woke the next morning with a heaviness in her chest, the kind that made breathing feel like work. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the penthouse bedroom she now shared with a man who felt both familiar and distant. The whisper from last night clung to her like smoke. 1 year. She sat up slowly, rubbing her temples. The room was quiet, too quiet. Min Jae was already gone. A note sat on the nightstand. Meeting. Back later. No heart. No warmth. Just words. She exhaled shakily. So this is how it starts, she murmured. She pushed herself out of bed, wrapped a robe around her, and stepped into the hallway. The house staff bowed politely as she passed, but their eyes flickered with curiosity, judgment, pity. She felt all of it. She made her way to the kitchen, hoping coffee would steady her. But when she opened the fridge, she froze. A photo was pinned to the inside of the door, a photo she had never seen. Min Jae, his second wife. Their wedding day. The woman was stunning, elegant, poised, Korean. Everything Grace was not. And the way he looked at her. Grace's stomach twisted. She reached out and touched the edge of the photo, her fingers trembling. Why is this here? She whispered. A voice behind her answered. Because he never removes anything. Grace spun around. Sumin stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression cold. He keeps everything. The girl continued. Photos, gifts, memories, even the things that hurt him. Grace swallowed. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know what you're competing with. Grace's breath hitched. I'm not competing with anyone. You are, Sumin said. You just don't realize it yet. Grace clenched her jaw. Why do you want me to fail so badly? I don't want you to fail, Sumin said quietly. I just know you will. Grace stared at her, stunned by the certainty in her voice. You don't know me. I know my father, the girl replied, and I know he doesn't change. Grace felt something inside her crack. Leave, she whispered. Sumin blinked. What? Leave? Grace repeated, her voice trembling. I need space. The girl hesitated, then turned and walked away. Grace closed the fridge slowly, her hands shaking. She leaned against the counter, trying to steady her breathing. Why is that photo still here? She whispered again. She didn't know if she was asking the room or herself. She didn't know if she wanted the answer. She just knew the whisper from last night suddenly felt heavier, more real, more dangerous. If you're still watching, hit the like button so this story reaches more people. And subscribe, because Grace's journey is only getting more intense. Grace spent the rest of the morning pacing the living room, her mind racing. She replayed every moment from the past year, every conversation, every smile, every silence. Had she missed signs? Had she ignored red flags? Had she fallen in love with a man who wasn't ready to love her back? The door opened. She turned sharply. Min-jae stepped inside, loosening his tie. He looked exhausted, older, distant. "You're home early," she said. Meeting ended sooner than expected. He walked past her toward the kitchen. She followed him. "Why is there a photo of you and your ex-wife in the fridge?" He froze. Slowly, he turned to face her. "What? The photo," she repeated. "Why is it still there?" He exhaled. "Grace, just answer me." He rubbed his forehead. "I didn't put it there." "But you didn't remove it either." "I didn't know it was there." "How do you not know what's in your own fridge?" she snapped. "Because I don't open it," he said, raising his voice slightly. "Staff handles everything." Grace stared at him. "So you're telling me you didn't see it?" "No." "And you didn't keep it intentionally?" "No." She looked away, her chest tight. It felt like a message. "From who?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Your daughter. Your past. Your silence." He stepped closer. "Grace, listen to me. Do you still love her?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His eyes widened. "What?" "Your ex-wife," she said, her voice cracking. "Do you still love her?" "Grace, just tell me the truth." He hesitated, and that hesitation, just a second, just a breath, felt like a knife. Grace stepped back. "You do." "No," he said quickly. "That's not what that meant." "Then what did it mean?" "It meant I was surprised," he said. "It meant I didn't expect a question. It meant I didn't know how to answer without hurting you." "So the truth hurts me?" she whispered. He closed his eyes. "Grace," she shook her head. "I can't do this right now." She turned and walked away before he could stop her. She went to the guest room, closed the door, and pressed her back against it. Her heart pounded. Her eyes burned. She slid down to the floor, covering her face with her hands. "1 year," she whispered. "Maybe she's right." She didn't know how long she sat there. Minutes. Hours. Time blurred. A soft knock came at the door. "Grace," Min-jae said quietly. "Please open the door." She didn't move. "I'm not leaving until you talk to me," he said. She still didn't move. "Grace, I don't love her," he said through the door. "But I did once. And that's not something you erase. Not easily. Not completely." Grace closed her eyes. "But that doesn't mean I want her back," he continued. "It doesn't mean I regret choosing you. It doesn't mean I'm comparing you to her." Grace whispered. "Then what does it mean?" "It means I'm human," he said. "And I have a past. A complicated one. But I want a future with you." She felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Open the door," he said softly. She hesitated. Then slowly, she reached up and unlocked it. The door opened. He knelt in front of her, his eyes soft, his expression vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She looked at him, searching his face for truth. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "Not now. Not ever." Her voice trembled. "Then fight for me." "I am," he said. "I will." She exhaled shakily. "I'm scared." "So am I." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. But even as their fingers intertwined, a shadow lingered between them. A shadow shaped like a whisper. A photo. A past that refused to stay buried. And Grace didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. Because something else, something far more painful, was waiting just around the corner. Grace didn't sleep that night. Even after she and Min-jae talked. Even after he held her hand. Even after he whispered that he wanted a future with her. Something inside her stayed restless. She lay awake listening to his breathing beside her, steady, calm, untouched by the storm raging inside her. She envied him for that. She feared him for that. She wondered if she would ever understand him the way he needed. And she wondered if he would ever understand her the way she deserved. When dawn finally crept into the room, she slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him. She needed space. She needed clarity. She needed to breathe without feeling like she was drowning in someone else's past. She walked into the living room and froze. Sumin was sitting on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the wall. Grace's heart sank. The girl looked small, fragile, nothing like the sharp-tongued, confident young woman from the wedding. "You're up early," Grace said softly. Sumin didn't look at her. "I didn't sleep." Grace hesitated, then sat down on the opposite end of the couch. Silence stretched between them, heavy, uncomfortable. "Why are you awake?" Sumin asked finally. "Couldn't sleep either." "Because of the photo?" Grace swallowed. "Partly. And partly because of me." It wasn't a question. Grace didn't deny it. Sumin exhaled shakily. "I shouldn't have said what I said yesterday." Grace blinked. "Which part?" "All of it." Grace stared at her, surprised. "Then why did you?" Sumin hugged her knees tighter. "Because I'm scared." Grace's breath caught. "Of me? Of losing him?" The girl whispered. "Every woman he marries takes a piece of him away, and I don't know how many pieces he has left." Grace felt her chest tighten. "I'm not here to take anything from you." "But you will," Sumin said. "You already have." Grace shook her head. "I want us to be a family." "We're not a family," Sumin said sharply. "We're strangers forced into the same house." Grace looked away, her throat burning. "I'm trying." "I know," the girl whispered. "And that's the problem." Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" Sumin finally looked at her, eyes glistening. "You're too good, too patient, too everything. And he listens to you. He never listened to my mother. He barely listened to me." Grace's heart ached. "That's not my fault." "I know," Sumin said again, "but it still hurts." Grace reached out slowly, unsure if the girl would pull away. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "You can't replace her," Sumin said, "but you can replace me." Grace froze. "What?" "He looks at you differently," the girl whispered. "He smiles more. He talks more. He tries more. And I don't know how to fit into that." Grace felt tears sting her eyes. "You don't have to fit into anything. You're his daughter. Nothing changes that." "Everything changes that," Sumin said. "You changed that." Grace didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to fix this. She didn't know how to heal wounds she didn't cause. But she knew she couldn't walk away from this moment. "Sumin," she whispered, "I'm not your enemy." The girl looked away. "I don't know how to believe that." Grace swallowed hard. "Then let me show you." Sumin didn't respond. She didn't agree. But she didn't walk away either. And for now, that was enough. If you're still watching, drop a comment saying, "I'm still here," so I know you're following every twist with Grace. Later that afternoon, Min-jae returned home early again. Grace was in the study, trying to distract herself with a book she wasn't actually reading. He stepped inside quietly. "Can we talk?" She closed the book slowly. "About what?" "About us." Her stomach tightened. "What about us?" He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I know yesterday was hard. I know the photo hurt you. I know Sumin's words hurt you. And I know I haven't done enough to protect you from any of it." Grace looked down. "I don't need protection. I need honesty." "I've been honest," he said. "Not enough," she whispered. He exhaled. "What do you want to know?" She lifted her eyes to his. "Why did your first marriage end?" He stiffened. "Grace, you said you wanted a future with me," she said. "Then let me understand your past." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "My first wife left because I shut her out. I buried myself in work. I didn't talk. I didn't share. I didn't let her in." Grace's chest tightened. "And your second marriage?" His jaw clenched. "She left because I was too controlling, too rigid, too cold." Grace swallowed. "And now," he said softly, "I'm trying not to repeat the same mistakes." "But you are," she whispered. He flinched. "Grace, you shut down when you're stressed. You disappear into work. You avoid hard conversations. You let your daughter fight battles that aren't hers, and you expect me to just endure it. He looked away. I'm trying. Trying isn't enough, she said. Not for a marriage. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Sharp. Do you want to leave? He asked quietly. The question hit her like a slap. No, she whispered. But I don't want to stay in a marriage where I'm constantly fighting ghosts. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. I don't want to lose you, he said. Then show me, she whispered. Show me I'm not temporary. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. But the moment was fragile, delicate, and it shattered when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed, tightened, darkened. I have to take this, he said. Grace pulled her hand back. Of course you do. He stepped out of the room. She listened to his voice through the door, low, tense, urgent. And then she heard something that made her blood run cold. A woman's voice. Soft, familiar, laughing. And Min-jae saying her name. His ex-wife. Grace stood slowly, her heart pounding. She walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last. She pressed her ear against the wood, and what she heard next made her knees buckle. I miss you, the woman said, and Min-jae didn't respond. Not immediately, not quickly, not the way a married man should. Grace covered her mouth, her breath shaking. The whisper from the wedding echoed in her mind. 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. And for the first time, she wondered if she would even make it that far. Grace pressed her back against the wall, her breath trembling as she listened to the muffled voice on the other side of the door. She couldn't hear every word, but she heard enough. The soft laugh, the familiar tone, the way Min-jae's voice dropped lower, almost gentle, almost intimate. She felt something inside her twist painfully. She stepped away from the door, her hands shaking. She didn't want to hear more. She didn't want to imagine more. She didn't want to feel this way, like she was already losing a battle she didn't even know she was fighting. She walked toward the window, staring out at the Seoul skyline. Lights flickered across the city, bright and alive, but she felt dim, small, alone. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn. Grace, Min-jae said quietly. That was her, she whispered. Yes. Why is she calling you? It was about the company, he said. She still has shares. Grace closed her eyes. And the part where she said she misses you. Silence. Heavy. Damning. She turned slowly. Why didn't you shut it down immediately? He exhaled. Because I didn't want to be rude. Rude, she repeated, her voice cracking. You didn't want to be rude to your ex-wife. Grace. But you don't mind being rude to me. He stepped closer. That's not fair. Fair, she whispered. Nothing about this is fair. He reached for her arm. She stepped back. Don't. His hand dropped. You're overthinking this. No, she said, her voice trembling. I'm finally thinking clearly. His jaw tightened. You're upset. Of course I'm upset, she snapped. Your ex-wife calls you, tells you she misses you, and you just let it happen. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He hesitated. Complicated. She laughed bitterly. Everything with you is complicated. Because life is complicated, he said. Marriage is complicated. Not like this, she whispered. Not with secrets. Not with hesitation. Not with ghosts calling in the middle of the day. He rubbed his forehead. I didn't ask her to call. But you didn't stop her. Grace, do you still have feelings for her? His eyes flickered. Just for a second. But she saw it. She felt it. And it broke her. I don't know, he said quietly. The words hit her like a punch. She staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. You don't know. It's not what you think, he said quickly. I don't want her back. I don't want that life again. But feelings, they don't disappear overnight. It's been years, she whispered. Years, Min-jae. I know. And you still don't know. He looked away. I'm trying to be honest. Honest, she whispered. Honest would have been telling me this before I married you. He flinched. Grace, honest would have been telling me you weren't ready. I am ready. You're not, she said. You're still living in the past. I'm trying to move forward. With me? Yes. Then why does it feel like I'm dragging you? He didn't answer, and that silence, cold, heavy, suffocating, told her everything she needed to know. She turned away, her eyes burning. I need air. Grace, don't follow me. She walked out of the room, her steps unsteady, her heart pounding. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she needed to get away from him before she shattered completely. She stepped outside onto the balcony, gripping the railing as the cold wind hit her face. She sucked in a shaky breath. Why does this hurt so much? She whispered. A voice behind her said, because you love him. She turned sharply. Sumin stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Grace wiped her eyes quickly. What do you want? I heard the argument. Grace stiffened. You were listening? The walls are thin, Sumin said, and you two weren't exactly whispering. Grace looked away. I don't want to talk about it. Then I will, the girl said, stepping closer. My mother never stopped loving him. Grace's breath caught. What? She pretends she moved on, Sumin said, but she didn't. She calls him every few months, sometimes for business, sometimes for other reasons. Grace swallowed hard, and he answers, always. Grace felt her knees weaken. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what you're walking into. Grace shook her head. I already know. I just didn't want to believe it. Sumin hesitated. Do you love him? Grace closed her eyes. Yes. Then fight. Grace opened her eyes slowly. You told me I would fail. I did, Sumin said, because I thought you were like the others. And now, the girl looked down. Now, I'm not sure. Grace stared at her, surprised by the honesty. Why? Because you're still here, Sumin whispered. Most people would have left by now. Grace exhaled shakily. I don't want to leave. Then don't. It's not that simple. It never is, the girl said. But if you walk away now, you'll regret it. Grace looked at her, searching her face. Why are you helping me? Sumin hesitated. Because I don't want him to be alone again. Grace's heart softened. Sumin, don't make me repeat it, the girl muttered, looking away. Grace almost smiled. Almost. But the pain was still too fresh, too raw. I don't know what to do, she whispered. Then breathe, Sumin said. And when you're ready, talk to him again. Grace nodded slowly. Thank you. Don't thank me, the girl said. I'm still not sure I like you. Grace let out a soft, broken laugh. Fair enough. Sumin turned to leave, but paused. Grace. Yes. Don't let her win. Grace frowned. Who? My mother. The girl's voice dropped. She doesn't want him back. She just doesn't want anyone else to have him. Grace felt a chill run through her. Why? Because losing him broke her, Sumin whispered. And she wants everyone else to break too. Grace stared at her, stunned. You're telling me she's doing this on purpose? I'm telling you she knows exactly what she's doing. Grace gripped the railing tighter. And what about you? I don't know, Sumin said. But I know this. If you give up, she wins. Grace looked out at the city again, her heart pounding. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could fix this. She didn't know if Min-jae was ready to let go of his past. But she knew one thing. She wasn't ready to lose him. Not yet. If you're still watching, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Because Grace's next move will change everything. She took a deep breath. Okay, she whispered. I'll fight. But she didn't know yet that the next battle would be the hardest one of all. Because the past wasn't done with them. Not even close. Grace didn't move from a balcony for a long time. The cold air numbed her skin, but not her thoughts. Her mind kept replaying the phone call, the hesitation in Min-jae's voice, the way he said he didn't know how he felt. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could swallow her whole if she wasn't careful. When she finally stepped back inside, the apartment felt too quiet, too still. She walked toward the living room and found Min-jae sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He looked up when she entered. We need to talk, he said. I know, she replied. He stood slowly. Grace, I'm sorry. For what? She asked. For answering the call? For not shutting her down? For hesitating when I asked if you still loved her? He winced. For hurting you? She crossed her arms. Then tell me the truth. I did. Not all of it. He hesitated. There's more, she said quietly. Isn't there? He looked away. And that was her answer. What else is she involved in? Grace asked. What else is she tied to? He rubbed the back of his neck. She's connected to the board. Grace blinked. The airline board? Yes. And she's been pushing for changes. Big ones. Ones that affect me. Grace felt her stomach twist. So she's using the company to get to you? It's not that simple. It is, Grace said. She's manipulating you. She's not, he insisted. She's just involved. Involved, Grace repeated. She told you she misses you. That was inappropriate, he admitted. But it doesn't mean she's trying to get me back. Then what does it mean? He didn't answer. Grace shook her head. You're too close to see it. And you're too emotional to see clearly, he said. The words hit her like a slap. She stepped back. Emotional. Grace, you think I'm overreacting? I think you're hurt, he said. And when you're hurt, you assume the worst. Because the worst keeps happening, she whispered. He closed his eyes. I'm trying to fix this. Then start by choosing me, she said. Not her. Not the past. Me. He opened his eyes slowly. I am choosing you. Then prove it. He stepped closer. How? Set boundaries, she said. Real ones. Clear ones. Ones that protect our marriage. He hesitated. You can't hesitate, she whispered. Not with this. I'll talk to her, he said. I'll make things clear. When? Tomorrow. Why not now? Because it's late, he said. And because I need to approach this carefully. Grace stared at him. Carefully. She's on the board, he reminded her. If I push too hard, it could affect the company. So the company comes first. That's not what I said. But that's what you mean. He sighed. Grace, I'm tired, she whispered. I can't do this tonight. She turned and walked toward the bedroom. He didn't follow. And that hurt more than anything he had said. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her chest tight. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to disappear. Instead, she walked to the bed and sat down, staring at the floor. Why does love feel like war? She whispered. A soft knock came at the door. Grace. She didn't respond. Can I come in? She still didn't respond. After a moment, she heard him walk away. She lay down slowly, curling into herself. She didn't sleep. She just waited for morning. When dawn came, she got dressed quietly and left the apartment before anyone woke up. She needed space. She needed clarity. She needed to breathe without feeling like she was suffocating. She walked through the streets of Seoul, the city slowly waking around her. She didn't know where she was going until she found herself standing in front of a small cafe she used to visit as a student. She stepped inside, ordered tea, and sat by the window. She stared at the steam rising from the cup, her mind racing. You look like you're carrying the whole world, a voice said. Grace looked up. The barista, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled softly. Rough morning. Grace nodded. Rough life. The woman chuckled. Love trouble. Grace hesitated, then nodded again. Ah, the woman said. Love is like kimchi. Spicy, messy. Sometimes it burns your tongue, but you still go back for more. Grace allowed a weak laugh. That's accurate. Whoever he is, the woman said, don't let him make you forget your worth. Grace swallowed. What if he already has? Then take it back. Grace looked down at her tea. I don't know how. Start by remembering who you were before him, the woman said. Strong, brave, enough. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you. Anytime, the woman said. And come back if you need more tea. Or more wisdom. Grace smiled faintly. She stayed in the cafe for another hour, gathering her thoughts. When she finally stood to leave, she felt a little lighter, a little stronger, a little more like herself. She stepped outside and froze. Min-jae stood on the sidewalk, looking exhausted and frantic. "Grace," he breathed, "I've been looking everywhere for you." She stiffened. "How did you find me?" "I remembered you liked this place," he said, "from when you were a student." Her heart twisted. "Why are you here?" "Because I can't lose you," he said. "Not like this." She crossed her arms. "You didn't even follow me last night." "I didn't want to push you," he said. "I wanted to give you space." "I didn't need space," she whispered. "I needed you." He flinched. "I'm sorry. Are you?" "Yes," he said. "And I need to tell you something." She waited. "I called her," he said. Grace's stomach dropped. "Why?" "To set boundaries," he said. "Real ones. Clear ones. I told her she can't call me outside of business hours. I told her she can't talk about the past. I told her she can't say things like that again." Grace stared at him, searching his face. "And how did she react?" "She was angry," he said. "Very angry." "Good," Grace whispered. "But she listened," he added. "And she agreed." Grace blinked. "She agreed?" "Yes." He stepped closer. "Because I told her something else." "What?" "That I love you." Grace's breath caught. "You what?" "I love you," he said again, his voice steady. "And I'm choosing you. Fully. Completely. No hesitation." Tears filled her eyes. "Min-jae, I'm sorry it took me so long to say it," he whispered. "But I'm saying it now. And I'm not taking it back." She felt her heart crack open. "I love you too," she whispered. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. And for the first time in days, she felt hope. Real hope. But she didn't know yet that this moment, this fragile, beautiful moment, would be tested sooner than she expected. Because the past wasn't done with them. And neither was his ex-wife. If you're still watching, hit the like button so this story reaches more people. And subscribe, because the next twist is coming. Grace stood there on the sidewalk, her hand still in his, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and fear. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust every word he said. But trust wasn't something that magically returned just because someone said the right things. It had to be rebuilt, brick by brick. And she wasn't sure yet if he understood how much damage had been done. "Grace," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Come home with me." She hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready." He swallowed. "Then let me walk with you. Wherever you want to go." She looked at him, really looked at him, the exhaustion in his eyes, the worry etched into his face, the vulnerability he rarely showed, and something inside her softened. "Okay," she said quietly. "Walk with me." They walked through the streets of Seoul in silence, their hands brushing occasionally, but not fully intertwining. The distance between them felt smaller than last night, but still present, still real. After a few minutes, he spoke. "I meant what I said." "I know," she replied softly. "I love you," he repeated, as if saying it again would make it more solid, more undeniable. Grace nodded. "I heard you, but you don't believe me." "I'm trying," she whispered. He exhaled. "What do you need from me?" She stopped walking. He stopped too. "I need consistency," she said. "I need boundaries. I need honesty. And I need you to stop letting your past bleed into our present." He nodded slowly. "I can do that." "Can you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Really?" "Yes," he said, "because I don't want to lose you." She looked away, blinking back tears. "I don't want to lose you either." He reached for her hand again. This time, she let him hold it. They walked a little further until they reached a small park. Children played on the swings. Elderly couples walked hand in hand. The world felt peaceful, something Grace desperately needed. They sat on a bench. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "There's something else you should know." Her stomach tightened. "What now?" "It's about the board." Grace's breath caught. "What about it?" "They're planning a vote," he said. "A major one. And she's leading it." Grace felt a chill run through her. "A vote for what?" He hesitated. "To remove me as CEO." Grace's eyes widened. "What?" "She's been building support for months," he said. "Quietly. Strategically. And the phone call yesterday, it wasn't just personal. It was political." Grace stared at him, stunned. She's trying to take your company. She's trying to take everything, he said quietly. And she's using our marriage as leverage. Grace felt her heart drop. How? She's telling the board I'm distracted, he said. That I'm making emotional decisions. That I'm unstable because of the divorce and now because of us. Grace covered her mouth. Oh my God. She's painting me as weak, he said. And she's using you to do it. Grace felt sick. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Because I didn't want to burden you, he said. And because I didn't want you to think you were the problem. I'm not the problem, she whispered. I know, he said. But she wants everyone else to think you are. Grace felt anger rising in her chest. Hot, sharp, fierce. She's doing this on purpose, Grace said. She wants to break you. She wants to break us, he corrected. Grace stood abruptly. Then we can't let her. He looked up at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. Grace. No, she said firmly. I'm done being quiet. I'm done being polite. I'm done letting her control everything from the shadows. He stood too. What are you saying? I'm saying we fight, she said. Together. He stared at her, something shifting in his eyes. Respect. Admiration. Hope. You're incredible, he whispered. I'm angry, she corrected. Both can be true. She took a deep breath. What's the plan? He hesitated. I don't have one yet. Then we make one, she said. But first we need to be united. No more secrets. No more hesitation. No more letting her dictate the narrative. He nodded slowly. You're right. Good, she said, because I'm not losing my marriage to a woman who already lost hers. He almost smiled. You're stronger than you think. I know, she said. I just forgot for a moment. He reached for her hand again. This time, she squeezed as tightly. Let's go home, she said. They walked back to the penthouse together, their steps more in sync than before. But as they approached the building, Grace noticed something that made her stop. A black car was parked outside. A woman stood beside it. Tall, elegant, beautiful. His ex-wife. Grace's heart dropped. What is she doing here? Grace whispered. Minjae stiffened. I don't know. The woman turned slowly, her eyes locking onto Grace's, and she smiled. A cold, calculated smile. Hello, Grace, she said sweetly. We need to talk. Grace felt her pulse spike. About what? The woman tilted her head. About your place in this family. Grace's breath caught, and whether you deserve to keep it. If you're still watching, hit the like button and subscribe, because what happens next will shake everything. Grace's breath caught in her throat as the woman stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement like a countdown. Minjae instinctively moved in front of Grace, but his ex-wife lifted a hand, stopping him with a single gesture. Relax, she said coolly. I'm not here to cause a scene. Grace felt her pulse hammering. Then why are you here? The woman's eyes slid to her, slow and deliberate. Because you need to understand the position you've put yourself in. Grace stiffened. I didn't put myself anywhere. I married my husband. Exactly, the woman said. You married him, and that comes with consequences you clearly weren't prepared for. Minjae stepped forward. That's enough. Is it? She asked, arching a brow. Because from where I'm standing, she has no idea what she stepped into. Grace clenched her jaw. That enlightened me. The woman smiled, sharp, cold, amused. You're young, naive, foreign. You think love is enough to survive in this world? In his world, Grace didn't flinch. Love is enough to survive anything. How adorable, the woman said, and how painfully wrong. Minjae's voice hardened. Say what you came to say and leave. Fine, she said, turning her attention fully to Grace. You're a liability. Grace blinked. Excuse me. To him. To the company. To the board. To everything he's built. Grace felt heat rising in her chest. I'm his wife. You're his distraction. The woman corrected. And the board sees it. They see how he looks at you. How he bends for you. How he hesitates because of you. Grace's stomach twisted. You're twisting things. Am I? The woman asked. Or are you just realizing the truth? Min-jae stepped between them. You're done. No, she said calmly. I'm not. She looked at Grace again. You think you're helping him, but you're not. You're weakening him. And when he falls, you'll fall with him. Grace's voice trembled. Why are you doing this? The woman's expression shifted, just for a moment. Something bitter, something wounded, something dangerous, because he was mine first. Grace felt the words like a slap. You left him, she whispered, and you replaced me. The woman said, so forgive me if I don't applaud your little fairy tale. Grace swallowed hard. This isn't a competition. Everything is a competition, the woman said, especially when power is involved. Min-jae grabbed her arm. Leave. Now. She pulled her arm free. You think you can protect her? You can't even protect yourself. Grace stepped forward before she could stop herself. I'm not afraid of you. The woman smiled. You should be. Grace's heart pounded. Why? Because I know him better than you ever will, she said. I know his weaknesses, his fears, his patterns, and I know exactly how to break him. Grace's voice shook. You're cruel. I'm realistic, the woman replied. And here's the reality. You won't last. Not in this world. Not with him. Not with the pressure. Not with the board. Not with me. Grace felt something inside her snap. Watch me. The woman's smile faded. We'll see. She turned to leave, but paused. Oh, and Grace. Grace didn't respond. The vote is in 2 weeks, she said. If he loses, it'll be because of you. Grace's breath hitched. You're lying. Am I? The woman asked. Ask him. She walked to her car, her heels echoing like a warning. The door closed. The engine started. The car pulled away, and Grace felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She turned to Min-jae slowly. Is it true? He looked away. Min-jae, she whispered. Is it true? He exhaled shakily. Yes. Grace felt her knees weaken. And you didn't tell me? I didn't want to worry you. You didn't want to worry me? She repeated, her voice breaking. She just told me the board might remove you because of me. It's not because of you, he said quickly. It's because of her. She's manipulating them. But she's using me to do it, Grace whispered. And you didn't think I deserved to know. He reached for her. She stepped back. Grace. No, she said, shaking her head. You keep saying you choose me, but you keep hiding things from me. I was trying to protect you. Stop saying that, she cried. I don't need protection. I need partnership. He froze. I need honesty, she said. I need transparency. I need to know what I'm fighting for. He swallowed. You're fighting for us. Then tell me everything, she whispered. No more secrets. He nodded slowly. Okay, everything, she repeated. I will. She took a shaky breath. Then start with this. What are our chances? He hesitated. Min-jae, she whispered. Tell me. He closed his eyes. If the vote happened today, I'd lose. Grace felt the world collapse around her. Oh my God. But we have 2 weeks, he said quickly. 2 weeks to change things. 2 weeks to fight back. Grace covered her mouth, her breath trembling. 2 weeks, Grace, he said softly, stepping closer. I need you. I can't do this alone. She looked at him, tears filling her eyes. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are, he whispered. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. She shook her head. I'm scared. So am I, he said. But we face it together. She stared at him, searching his face, searching for truth, searching for something to hold on to. Please, he whispered. Don't give up on me. Grace exhaled shakily. I'm not giving up. Relief washed over his face. But, she added, if we're doing this, we're doing it my way. He blinked. Your way? Yes, she said, because your way clearly isn't working. He almost smiled. Fair enough. She took his hand. Let's go inside. They walked toward the building together. But Grace didn't look back at the street. She didn't need to. She could still feel the woman's words lingering in the air like poison. And she knew, deep in her bones, that the next 2 weeks would test everything. Their marriage, their trust, their strength, their love. If you're still watching, hit the like button and subscribe, because the storm is just beginning. Grace walked into the penthouse with her pulse still racing, her mind replaying the woman's words like a threat carved into stone. She didn't even take off her coat before turning to face Min-jae. "We need to talk. Now." He nodded, tension tightening his shoulders. "I know." They stepped into the living room, the silence between them thick and electric. Grace paced, her hands shaking. "She came here to intimidate me." "I know." "She came here to warn me." "I know." "She came here to tell me I'm the reason you might lose everything." He flinched. "Grace, is she right?" she demanded. "Am I the reason the board is turning against you?" "No," he said firmly. "She is. But she's using me." Grace whispered. "She's using our marriage, our age difference, my nationality, everything. Because she's desperate," he said, "and because she knows you're the one thing she can't control." Grace stopped pacing. "What does that mean?" He stepped closer. "It means you're the only person who's ever challenged me, the only person who's ever made me change, the only person who's ever made me feel something real." Her breath caught, and she hates that. Grace swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" "We fight," he said. "Together." She nodded slowly. "Then tell me everything. No more secrets." He exhaled. "Okay." They sat on the couch. He took her hands in his. "The board vote is in 2 weeks. She's been building alliances behind my back. She's been spreading rumors. She's been twisting the narrative." "What narrative?" Grace asked. "That I'm unstable," he said. "That I'm distracted. That I'm making emotional decisions because of the divorce and because of you." Grace felt her stomach twist. "And the board believes her?" "Some do," he admitted. "Enough to make this dangerous." Grace looked down. "So what's the plan?" "I need to meet with each board member individually," he said. "I need to show them I'm still in control, still capable, still the leader they trust." "And what about me?" Grace asked. "What do I do?" He hesitated. "You stay out of it." Grace's head snapped up. "Excuse me." "I don't want you getting dragged into this," he said. "It's ugly. It's political. It's my marriage," she cut in, "and I'm already dragged into it." "Grace, no," she said firmly. "You don't get to shut me out again. Not this time." He rubbed his forehead. "I'm trying to protect you." "Stop protecting me," she said. "Start trusting me." He looked at her, conflicted. "I don't want you to get hurt." "I'm already hurt," she whispered, "but I'm still here." He closed his eyes. "Grace, let me help you," she said. "Let me stand beside you, not behind you." He opened his eyes slowly. "What do you want to do?" She took a deep breath. "I want to meet her." His eyes widened. "Absolutely not." "I need to understand her," Grace said. "I need to know what I'm fighting." "She'll tear you apart." "She already tried," Grace said, "and I'm still standing." He shook his head. "Grace, she's dangerous." "So am I," she whispered. He stared at her, stunned by the fire in her voice. "You don't know what she's capable of." "Then show me," Grace said. "Tell me everything she's done." He hesitated. "Min-jae," she whispered. "Please." He exhaled shakily. "She didn't just leave me," he said. "She destroyed me." Grace's breath caught. "How?" "She leaked private company documents," he said. "She fed information to competitors. She manipulated the board. She turned my closest allies against me." Grace felt her chest tighten. "Why?" "Because she wanted control," he said. "And when she couldn't control me, she tried to control everything around me." Grace swallowed. "And now she's doing it again." "Yes," he said. "But this time, she's using you." Grace looked away, her heart pounding. "Then I need to face her." "No," he said firmly. "I won't let you." "You don't get to let me," she said. "This is my life too." He stood abruptly. "I won't risk you." She stood too. "And I won't let her destroy us." They stared at each other, the air crackling with tension. "Grace," he said softly, "I can't lose you." "Then stop pushing me away," she whispered. He closed his eyes, defeated. Okay, he said finally. If you want to meet her, I'll arrange it. Grace nodded. Good. But not alone, he added. I'll be there. Fine. And not at the company, he said. Somewhere neutral. Fine. He stepped closer. Are you sure you're ready for this? She swallowed. No, then why do it? Because she thinks I'm weak, Grace said, and I need her to know I'm not. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. We'll face her together, he said. All of it. She nodded. Together. But even as she said it, a knot formed in her stomach. Because deep down, she knew this meeting wouldn't just be a confrontation. It would be a test. Of her strength. Of their marriage. Of everything they had left. And she wasn't sure either of them was ready for what would happen next. If you're still watching, hit the like button and subscribe, because the next scene will change everything. Grace didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every word the woman had said. You're a liability. You're weakening him. You won't last. The words crawled under her skin like poison. She turned to look at Minjae beside her. He was asleep, his breathing steady. His face calm. How could he sleep when everything was falling apart? How could he rest when the ground beneath him was cracking? She slipped out of bed quietly and walked to the living room. The city lights spilled through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her breathing. She didn't hear him approach. Grace. She turned. He stood in the doorway, hair tousled, eyes heavy with sleep. Why are you awake? He asked softly. Why are you awake? She countered. He walked toward her slowly. I felt you leave the bed. She looked away. I couldn't sleep. Because of her? Because of everything, she whispered. He reached for her hand. She let him take it, but her fingers were cold. Talk to me, he said. Tell me what's going on in your head. She swallowed hard. I'm scared. Of what? Of losing you, she whispered. Of losing us. Of losing everything we've built. He squeezed her hand gently. You won't lose me. You can't promise that, she said. Not with what's happening. I can promise I'll fight, he said. For you. For us. For the company. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Then we need to be stronger than we've ever been. We will be. No, she said. We need a plan. He nodded slowly. Okay, let's make one. They sat on the couch, facing each other. First, Grace said, we need to understand the board. Who's on your side? Who's on hers? 3 are with me, he said. 2 are undecided. 4 are leaning toward her. Grace's stomach tightened. So she has the majority. Not yet, he said, but she's close. Then we need to flip the undecided ones, Grace said, and weaken her influence. He nodded. I can meet with them individually. Good, she said, but you need to be strategic. Calm, confident, no emotion. He raised a brow. No emotion. Not with them, she said. They need to see you as strong, stable, unshakable. He almost smiled. You sound like CEO. Maybe I should be, she said. He laughed softly. Maybe you should. She didn't smile. I'm serious. His expression softened. I know. She took a deep breath. Second, we need to deal with her. His jaw tightened. Grace, I'm not backing down, she said. I'm meeting her. I'll be there. Good, she said, because I'm not doing this alone. He nodded. We'll set it up tomorrow. She exhaled shakily. Okay. He reached out and cupped her face gently. We'll get through this. She leaned into his touch. Promise. Promise. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she let herself believe him. Let herself feel safe. Let herself breathe. But the moment shattered when his phone buzzed on the table. They both froze. He reached for it slowly. Grace's heart pounded. Who is it? She whispered. He looked at the screen. His expression changed. Darkened. It's her. Grace felt her stomach drop. Answer it, she said. Put it on speaker. Grace, do it. He hesitated, then pressed the button. What do you want? He said, his voice cold. The woman's voice floated through the speaker, smooth and calm. We need to talk. We already did, he said. Not enough, she replied, and certainly not honestly. Grace's jaw clenched. What do you want? She demanded. A pause. Then, I want to meet. Grace's pulse spiked. When? Tomorrow morning, the woman said, at the Han River Cafe. Fine, Grace said. We'll be there. Just you, the woman added. Grace froze. No, Min-jae said immediately. Absolutely not. This is between us, the woman said. Not him. Grace swallowed. Why? Because I want to see what kind of woman he replaced me with. Grace felt heat rise in her chest. I'm not afraid of you. Good, the woman said. Then come alone. She's not going alone, Min-jae snapped. Then the meeting doesn't happen, the woman said. Your choice. The line went dead. Grace stared at the phone, her heart pounding. You're not going, he said. Yes, she whispered. I am. Grace. She wants to see me, Grace said. Fine, let her. It's a trap. I know. Then why go? Because running makes me look weak, she said. And I'm not weak. He grabbed her shoulders gently. I won't let her hurt you. She already did, Grace whispered. But I'm still here. He closed his eyes, pained. I can't lose you. Then trust me, she said. Trust that I know what I'm doing. He opened his eyes slowly. I'll be nearby, he said. You won't see me, but I'll be there. She nodded. Okay. He pulled her into his arms. She let him hold her. But her mind was already racing, already preparing, already bracing for the storm, waiting for her in the morning. If you're still watching, hit the like button and subscribe, because the next scene is the confrontation you've been waiting for. Grace barely tasted her breakfast the next morning. Her hands trembled each time she lifted the cup, and her stomach twisted with every passing minute. The meeting was in less than an hour. The Han River Cafe, neutral ground, public enough to feel safe, private enough for damage to be done. Min-jae watched her from across the table, worry etched into every line of his face. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. I do, she replied. For us. He reached across the table and took her hand. I'll be close. I know. If she says anything, she will, Grace said, and I'll handle it. He swallowed hard. I hate this. So do I, she whispered. But running won't fix anything. He nodded slowly. Let's go. The drive to the cafe felt like a countdown. Grace stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Her heart pounded with every turn, every stoplight, every breath. When they arrived, Min-jae parked a block away. I'll be right here, he said. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you walk out. I don't care what she's saying. Grace nodded. Okay. He cupped her face gently. You're stronger than she thinks. I know, she whispered. I just need to remember it. She stepped out of the car before she lost her nerve. The cafe sat by the river, sunlight glinting off the water. People walked dogs, jogged, laughed. The world looked normal. Grace didn't feel normal. She stepped inside. The woman was already there, sitting by the window. Perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect smile. A predator waiting for her prey. Grace approached slowly. The woman looked up. You're late. I'm on time, Grace said. You're early. The woman smirked. Touché. Grace sat down. The woman studied her for a long moment, eyes sharp, calculating. You look tired, she said. Rough night. I'm fine, Grace replied. Are you? Always, the woman said. I don't break easily. Neither do I. The woman's smile tightened. We'll see. A waiter approached. Coffee. Black, the woman said. Tea, Grace replied. When he left, the woman leaned forward. Let's get to the point. Please, Grace said. I don't have time for games. Everything is a game, the woman said. Especially this. Grace folded her hands. What do you want? To understand you, the woman said. To understand why he chose you. Grace didn't flinch. Maybe because I love him. Love is irrelevant, the woman said. Love doesn't keep a marriage alive. Power does. Control does. Compatibility does. Love matters, Grace said. Not in his world. the woman replied. In his world, love is a weakness. Grace felt her jaw tighten. Maybe that's why your marriage failed. The woman's eyes flashed. Careful. You wanted honesty. Grace said, I'm giving it to you. The woman leaned back. You think you're strong. You think you're brave. You think you can handle him. I know I can. No, the woman said. You can't. You don't know him like I do. I know who he is now, Grace said, not who he was with you. The woman's smile faded. He hasn't changed. He has, Grace said, because he wants to. He changes for a while, the woman said. Then he snaps back. He always snaps back. Grace shook her head. People grow. Not him, the woman said. He's stubborn, cold, controlling. He shuts down. He disappears. He isolates. And when he breaks, he takes everyone down with him. Grace swallowed hard. He's trying. He tried with me too, the woman said. And look how that ended. Grace leaned forward. Why are you doing this? The woman's expression shifted. Anger, pain, bitterness swirling together. Because he was mine, she whispered. And you took him. You left him, Grace said. I left because he broke me. The woman snapped. And now he's breaking you. Grace didn't respond. The woman continued. You think you're special? You think you're different? You're not. You're just the next one in line. Grace's voice trembled. I'm not leaving him. You will, the woman said. Eventually. They all do. Grace shook her head. Not me. You're already cracking, the woman said. I can see it. Grace took a deep breath. You came here to scare me. Yes, the woman said, because fear makes people leave. I'm not leaving. You will, the woman said, when he loses the vote. Grace froze. What? The woman smiled. Oh, he didn't tell you. Grace's heart pounded. Tell me what? If he loses the vote, the woman said, he loses everything. His position, his influence, his reputation, his power. Grace swallowed. I know that. But did you know, the woman continued, that the board will blame you? Grace's breath caught. What? They already do, the woman said. They think you're a distraction, a weakness, a liability. Grace felt her stomach twist. You're lying. Ask him, the woman said. Ask him what they said about you in the last meeting. Grace's hands trembled. Stop. No, the woman said. You need to hear this. Grace shook her head. You're trying to break me. I'm trying to prepare you, the woman said, because when he falls, he'll drag you down with him, and you'll lose everything. Grace stood abruptly. I'm done. The woman didn't move. You're not strong enough for this world. Grace leaned in, her voice low and steady. Watch me. She turned and walked out of the cafe, her heart pounding, her breath shaking. She didn't see Min-jae at first. He stepped out from behind a pillar, eyes searching her face. Grace. She didn't let him speak. She walked straight into his arms, burying her face in his chest. He held her tightly. What did she say? He whispered. Grace shook her head. Too much. Are you okay? No, she whispered. But I will be. He held her tighter. I'm here. She closed her eyes. We need to talk. About what? About what the board said about me. He froze. Grace, don't lie, she whispered. Not now. He exhaled shakily. Let's go home. She nodded, but as they walked away from the cafe, Grace knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next would either save them or destroy them. If you're still watching, hit the like button and subscribe, because the final truth is coming. The ride home felt heavier than the air before a storm. Grace sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Min-jae kept glancing at her, his jaw tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He didn't speak. He didn't push. He just drove, letting her breathe, letting her gather the pieces of herself the woman had tried to shatter. When they reached the penthouse, Grace stepped inside and immediately walked to the living room. She didn't sit. She didn't pace. She just stood there, staring at the city through the glass. Grace, Min-jae said softly behind her. Talk to me. She inhaled slowly. What did the board say about me? He froze. Grace, tell me, she whispered. Please. He exhaled shakily. Some of them questioned your influence. She closed her eyes. They said I've changed, he continued. That I'm softer, more emotional, less focused. Grace swallowed hard. Because of me. No, he said quickly. Because I'm human. Because I'm tired of being a machine. Because loving you made me realize how empty I was before. She turned slowly. But they blamed me. He hesitated. Some did. Her chest tightened. And you didn't defend me? I did, he said. But defending you made them think I was proving their point. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. So I'm a weakness. No, he said firmly, stepping closer. You're the only thing that makes me stronger. She shook her head. They don't see it that way. They don't matter, he said. You matter. She looked away. She said, I'll leave you when you fall. He stiffened. She doesn't know you. She thinks she does, Grace whispered. She thinks I'm like her. You're nothing like her, he said. Nothing. Grace's voice trembled. What if she's right? What if I'm not strong enough for this world? For your world? He stepped closer, cupping her face gently. Grace, you walked into that cafe alone. You faced her. You didn't break. You didn't run. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. She blinked back tears. I'm scared. So am I, he whispered. But fear doesn't mean weakness. It means we have something worth fighting for. She leaned into his touch, her breath shaking. I don't want to lose you. You won't, he said. Not unless you walk away. She looked up at him. I'm not walking away. Relief washed over his face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. After a long moment, she pulled back slightly. What do we do now? We prepare, he said, for the vote, for the board, for whatever she tries next. Grace nodded. Then let's start. They sat at the dining table, paper spread out, notes scribbled, strategies forming. Grace listened, asked questions, challenged him, pushed him, and for the first time, he let her in completely. No walls, no hesitation, no secrets. Hours passed. The sun dipped low. The city lights flickered awake. At one point, Grace looked up and said, You know she's terrified. Of what? He asked. Of losing control. Grace said, Of losing you. Of losing the power she once had. He nodded slowly. She always needed control. And you always gave it to her. Grace said gently. Until you didn't. He looked at her, something soft and vulnerable in his eyes. I don't want control with you. I want partnership. She smiled faintly. Good, because I'm not easy to control. He laughed softly. I've noticed. They worked late into the night, and for the first time since the wedding, Grace felt like they were truly on the same side. 2 days later, the board meeting arrived. Grace didn't attend. She wasn't allowed to. But she waited outside the conference room, her heart pounding with every muffled voice she heard through the door. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Finally, the door opened. Board members filed out, their expressions unreadable. Some glanced at her. Some didn't. Some nodded politely. Some avoided her entirely. Then Minjae stepped out. Grace stood immediately. What happened? He didn't speak. Her heart dropped. Minjae. He walked toward her slowly. Too slowly. Her breath caught. Then he stopped in front of her, exhaled shakily, and whispered, I won. Grace's knees nearly buckled. You what? I won, he repeated, his voice breaking. We won. She covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Oh my God. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her slightly off the ground as she cried into his shoulder. You did it, she whispered. You did it. No, he said softly. We did it. She pulled back, wiping her tears. What about her? He hesitated. She lost her influence. The board saw through her manipulation. She won't be a problem anymore. Grace exhaled shakily. It's over. He nodded. It's over. She leaned her forehead against his. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of us, he whispered. They walked out of the building hand in hand, the the weight of the past weeks finally lifting. Outside, the air felt lighter. The world felt brighter. And for the first time since the wedding, Grace felt safe, loved, chosen. As they reached the car, Minjay stopped and turned to her. "Grace, yes, I meant what I said," he whispered. "I love you." She smiled through her tears. "I love you too." He kissed her, soft, slow, certain. A kiss that felt like a promise. A beginning. A victory. A future. If you made it to the end, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because stories like this deserve to be shared.